Hello and welcome to the Claw Studio here at the Royal Opera House and to this Insight supported by Rolex. I'm Rebecca Jones and tonight we're exploring Picture a Day Like This, a new opera from Sir George Betjeman and Martin Crimp. It's the story of one woman on an ordinary day. Then something terrible happens. Her infant child dies, but she's given the opportunity to bring him back to life. All she needs to do is find a button from the sleeve of a genuinely happy human being. Sounds simple enough, but every encounter ends in disappointment until she meets the mysterious owner of a magnificent garden. Picture a Day Like This had its UK premiere at the Limbury studio here at the Royal Opera House at the weekend. Karina Niemeyer, who conducted last year's The Rape of Lucretia, is conducting a young, dynamic cast. And I'm delighted to say that we're going to be hearing from both Karina and some of the cast a little later on. But first of all, we must meet the man of the moment, the composer of the opera. Please welcome Sir George Betjeman. Great to have you here, George. Sit down. Oh, so much to talk about, George. This is such an exciting opera. I wonder, first of all, let's talk about the sound of it. What can people expect to hear?
Gosh. Well, it's just over an hour in length. It's quite an intimate piece. There are 5 singers. 3 of them play double roles in the opera. The orchestra is an orchestra, but it's quite a small orchestra. 22 players. I suppose in terms of the sound, I wanted it to be as varied as possible. The woman who you've already described, on her quest, encounters a series of people, each who seem initially happy and turn out not to be. And the characters that Martin Crimp, my collaborator, has given me are extremely varied. And so I wanted to make each scene sound absolutely unique and individual within the context of the whole piece. Plus, I adore the human voice, and I'm besotted by the interface, the interaction between voice and instruments. So I tried to give the most inventive and lyrical lines I could for the singers, and at the same time wrap them round the instruments in the orchestra.
Fantastic. Lots to pick up on there. But I suppose in terms of the story itself, where did the original idea come from? What was the starting point?
Well, the starting point was Martin Crimp, and we searched for a story for this, our 4th opera together, for quite a long time. It didn't get very far, for about a year. And then I remember that COVID came and lockdown, the first severe lockdown came in the beginning of March 2020. And when after about 2 or 3 months we were allowed out for the first time, we met near his home in Richmond and we walked through the park on an absolutely extraordinarily beautiful spring day. And he described to me the research that he'd been doing and this story, which has several roots. It goes back to the start of Buddhism in what will be now northern India. There's a version of the story at the time of Alexander the Great. In fact, there may have been some encounters between the army of Alexander, even he himself, and the beginnings of Buddhism. It appears in the Renaissance. It also appears in the 19th century in very different forms. Even, I believe, it was used by Calvino in one of his novels. But the basic idea Martin described to me was this a search for happiness and a way of turning round fate and conquering death, and how it proves very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds such a simple idea. You mentioned this is your 4th opera with Martin Crimp, and Martin Crimp unfortunately can't be here with us this evening because I know he's abroad. But I wondered if you could give us an insight into how you work together, because you have this walk, you come up with this idea. What happens next?
Well, he described the story in detail to me and all the background, and it took about 3 hours.
Right.
And I was very excited by what he described to me. It seemed fresh for us, it seemed a new avenue, a new form as well. and a new temperature, a new feeling for work between us. So after my positive response, he then began to work, started to work, and we would discuss what type of voices we wanted involved, whether there would be narration or not, whether all sorts of facets to do with the theatrical style, the size of the orchestra, the size of the cast, the type of singers. And I think already we began to meet our voices then, our singers. And so a lot of pre-discussion, a lot of sharing of information, give and take. And then there comes a moment when suddenly and unexpectedly it falls silent. And then I don't hear from him for about 6 to 9 months.
Really?
Yes. And I trust him that something's going on now and he needs to be left alone. I think we had one talk when he was finding it very difficult in the middle, and he sent me some stuff, and I was able, in a way, to console him, as he is able to me when I get blocked while writing. And then again, silence for several months, until a rather bland-looking envelope drops through the door. Not an email, nothing fancy, just that, and I recognize his writing. And I'm not expecting it.
Yeah.
And then I suddenly think, oh my God, this is it. So in some ways, I'm a little bit reluctant to open it because it's a crucial moment.
Yeah.
If it doesn't move me, frankly, how am I going to spend the next 2 or 3 years composing with it?
So you haven't started writing a note
Not
at this
a note
point? Okay.
until I get the absolutely complete text.
Yeah.
But there it was. I read it. It gave me goose pimples. And that's a sign which I can't control, but it's a sign that, and there's some wood to touch, it's a sign which says, this says something to me.
Yeah.
And so, and then I had to live with it. And I was also busy writing another piece, and then had a little bit of touring. And so for 6 months, I just lived with it, reading it occasionally. And then there comes the moment, and it's my turn to start.
Yeah. And when you do you start at the beginning?
Never. Never. Every composer is different. Every composer changes as they mature. But one thing I know about myself is that it takes me quite a long time to get into the expressive world of a piece and to find the ways, the techniques that I have to use to write it, to find its sound world, its harmonic feeling, its pacing, its color, all manner of things. And I know that if I was to I don't have that fully formed within my imagination when I begin. There's so much to discover, there's so much to exclude, and there's so much to be lost through and then find your way. And so if I was to start at the beginning would be very tentative, and you with experienced ears would hear that. You'd hear the fact that the piece is beginning to grow with the narration, and that will be tiresome. You have to, I believe, not allow someone listening to have any idea about how the piece is written. It must seem like it was composed simultaneously with its being performed, that it must be spontaneous and have a sort of unity that as if it was thought up in just a minute or two.
Yeah.
Now that's impossible to do, absolutely impossible to do. You write one note after one note, and there's thousands, tens of thousands of them. What I do is, and I've got used to doing this, I find a corner, a little crevice in the text, somewhere in a scene, which will allow me in. And I start from there, and then I build out, build back, and begin, not as a mosaic, but composing the scenes not in the order that you hear them.
And do you go back and change things?
Very little, actually, because I tend to score after the first few months, maybe, but then I start to produce the full score. And once that's done, it's so cumbersome and it just wouldn't be possible to change it. Yeah. So, and also it may be a complete illusion, but I try to get things right before going on to the next bar. Yeah. And if it's not right, I have to wait. And there's so much that's possible, far too much is possible for a composer today, because you can do anything as long as you do it well, and that's just too much for an imagination. So you have to limit, and I'm grateful that somehow the idea hasn't come to me that you could go back 247 bars and improve it radically, or rewrite it, because then I would just turn in circles for years. Fortunately, there's a deadline coming, and I can see it coming like a ship coming into port. I can see it getting nearer and nearer and nearer, and I have to push forward.
Yeah, you're like a journalist, you need a deadline. I think I'm right, aren't I, that you've been working with Martin Crimp since 2005. But am I also right that you met other directors and creative types, for example, Arthur Miller, with a view when you first started thinking that you would write opera? Tell me a little bit about what happened. How did that work?
It's very embarrassing. It's like sort of almost like writing to someone saying, would you marry me? We haven't met, but we've got something very important to do together. Should we give it a go? Because the relationship between a writer and a composer, if it functions, is extremely intimate. You're giving your creativity, maybe in a way, your heart for someone else to do things with.
Yeah.
I'm led by the text that I'm given. I'm inspired by them. I'm moved by them, but also I have to serve them. Above all, I have to serve them. So the relationship and it needs a lot of trust and understanding. And that you can't just create like this. So I love opera more than anything in the artistic world, and basically have done since I was about 10. But it took me a long, long time to find Martin. I met so many playwrights and novelists, some of them extraordinary people, and it never got beyond the first or second or maybe third meeting. And that was dispiriting after an amount of time, if not humiliating, having to constantly go up to say, would you like to write an opera, perhaps, or getting someone to introduce you. And it never worked. But this became so, not depressing, but disappointing, that after 20 years of searching, I sort of gave up.
Oh, did you? So how did you come to meet Martin, and why was Martin the one?
Maybe it was the right time for me. Maybe I'd written enough music, had enough experience, enough technique. Maybe I'd moved into a direction which I was doing intentionally to make opera possible. When I was first trying to write opera, the way that opera was written then didn't suit the type of work, in a vague way, I was imagining. The type of vocal writing, the interface with instruments, the degree of narrative clarity, all manner of things I felt didn't suit me. So I teach at King's College London. I've taught composition there, something I love to do for over 20 years. And one of my colleagues then was a very distinguished Bach expert and a fantastic viola da gamba player who founded the ensemble Phantasm, wonderful group of musicians. And his name is Lawrence Dreyfus. And over lunch one day, he described this extraordinary person that he knew. I don't know how his name came up. And then he said, George, you should meet him. And then he went, actually, I'm not sure. And then he went, actually, I think you should. And he arranged, we haven't got time for me to tell you, but he arranged the encounter in such a subtle way, both I think for Martin's side, but also for mine, that it was good. It was the best conditions under which I'd met any of these 50, 60 people over the last 25 years. And I'd read all of Martin's published plays. Again, another friend had sent me, who works at Faber and Faber, had sent me, emergency, super quick, all his plays. And I'd read them and found them fascinating, rather terrifying, because they're very powerful and sometimes immensely potent and violent. And so I didn't know what to expect. And then we just met, and we talked, and there was an atmosphere there. And I really did sense for the first time, this might work. His interest in form, his intelligence, his integrity, artistically, I sensed very strongly, and his imagination and his quietness as a person. He's very gentle and very quiet, and yet his work is fulminating and potent and terrifying, powerful. And so this was also a bit mysterious. How do I mix that person with the work I know? Plus one other thing, which was crucial. He adores music. It has a physical, you can see, if he's not being watched, you can see the effect it has on him. And that is why he persevered with me, I think, and has done now over 17 years, because music is it's immeasurably important to him.
I'd like to pick up on a point you made about how you've been obsessed with opera since you were 10. But I mean, you were initially in your career known as an orchestral composer. And I think I'm right, aren't I, that you had one of your earliest pieces played at the Proms when you were just, 20? So how did you decide the time was right to move into opera? And why was it opera that you really, really wanted to write?
I got the opera bug when I was about 10, 11, 12. And my favourite operas when I was, even before a teenager, were Salome, Electra, and Wozzeck. All of them very adult themed, all of them very scary, and I loved that. I loved that, and also with fantastic, unbelievable use of the orchestra. My repertoire has expanded a long way beyond and before then. And I had a book of myths as a child with 5 or 6 pages given to some of the most famous myths in world history, beautifully illustrated. And if I had a free afternoon, this will sound like a very strange child, I would take one of these myths and invent an opera in my head. And an hour and a half or 2 later, I would have finished this imagined opera, which will never, ever be heard except between my 2 ears. But I had the urge to do it. Plus, there's one other thing. When I was at school, we did plays. And even when I was 11, I was writing incidental music for these plays and performing them, sometimes with an ensemble, heterogeneous ensemble of about 13 mismatched, not very capable kids playing the instruments. But I would conduct them and play the piano with an audience behind me. And I felt at certain good moments, when, if they happened, there was this mysterious tension between drama and music and people. This behind my back. I can still feel it now. And so I wanted, obviously, there's no question, I wanted to participate in that. And in a way, it was sad and frustrating for me for decades not to be able to.
Forgive me for bringing it up, and I hope you don't mind, but you have talked about the fact that earlier in your career you experienced writer's block, and I think you were only able to write a few notes, a few bars of music for several years. Is that right?
That's a colourful version of it, because I did produce several pieces,
okay,
but they took a long time.
Yeah.
And I still get blocked. And I got blocked when I was 12 composing. I'm afraid it's just something that happens to me. My brain is usually substantially confused, and I just have to be patient and obstinate till things clarify. And I've learned a way of coping with it and a way of helping myself as I've grown older.
So how do you cope with it?
When fog descends, which is quite very frequent, stop writing. Stop. Don't push beyond it. You have to push, but if you push too much, you reach a knot, and a knot can take weeks to unravel. So learn to leave it. I'm still not very good at that. But what I have learned to do is to read novels, books, anything, and something which engrosses me, takes me away from the tensions of writing, clears my mind, stimulates my mind at the same time. And then, then maybe the next day or 3 days later, or in an hour, it unlocks and I can go ahead. Then I've also learned that the job of a composer isn't just inspiration, and it's not just what you like and your sensibility and instinct is not enough, particularly when you start to write polyphonically, when there's lots of things going on at the same time. And so I've learned some techniques, which I've invented for myself, means of writing music, means of looking at the constituents of music, above all rhythm, time, pitch and sound. And when the inspiration level perhaps is confused, or usually at the start of a scene to help me get going, I play with these nuts and bolts, and usually something lights, and then I'm off. And it can create a thread I can hold on to, and it also now, and I understand, enables me the type of music I want to write and that I couldn't write without it. So that sort of craftsman/architect approach is something which I would never have imagined when I was very young composing, and which has become very useful to me.
Well, and it's an approach that has paid off, and here we are with Picture a Day Like This. New, as I say, to the Royal Opera House, but it received its world premiere in Aix-en-Provence earlier this year. It had some stunning, stunning reviews. George, the New York Times, I know, said that it was a masterpiece, which must have been very pleasing. I don't know, do you read the reviews?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Particularly if they're nice.
How has it changed from Aix to here in London?
Well, it's the same production, which I very much like. We have 2 new singers out of 5, though they were present in Aix as covers, which was a wonderful thing for them to do. The orchestra, of course, is different. And the conductor is different. I was in Aix for 2 months, and I conducted, I think, every single rehearsal, almost every single rehearsal, and all the performances. But I had at my side, as my musical colleague and assistant, Corinna Niemeyer. And it was always certain that when the work came here and when it goes some other places afterwards, that she would be conducting. So that's a big difference and a very pleasant one for me.
And what is it like to hand over the baton?
Well, it can be terrifying, and it could be painful. Because, if it's not right and not understood, or digested, or technically not right, that will be painful for me. Very. I would rather run. But Corinna is a wonderful musician, and she's so greatly digested the nature and the notes of the piece. So it's fascinating for me to see and hear someone else do it who understands it and also has authority with the music, and also who I've learned now so greatly to trust as a colleague. She's so incredibly dedicated. It's just incredible. So it's been very, very nice. And all the stuff about when you've worked in an opera for 2 or 3 years and you have to go out and conduct the first performance at 8 o'clock, the feeling 7 minutes before 8 is not very pleasant. Because, if you muck up, then you're not only damaging the evening and everybody, but the work you've done for years. And so it's a moment of great tension. And I'm spared that now. So I'm very grateful.
Well, look, it seems like the perfect cue, though, because I'm delighted to say that Corinna Niemeyer is with us. And Corinna, I'd be delighted if you could join us.
Hello, my dear. Hello.
I don't know how much of that you heard.
I was just taken away for some microphone instructions. But
Your ears would be burning.
Yes.
You've conducted a few performances now of the opera here at the Royal Opera House. How is it going?
wonderful. No, it's really great. Also, I mean, we did now 3 performances, and we have another 9 to come. And it's very interesting because already in the 3 performances, somehow the piece changes. And sometimes we have more time for some colors. Sometimes I don't know, I get an impulse from one of the singers. Something is maybe more brutal or more poetic. And then, okay, we take it more in this direction, and it's very interesting that this wonderful score allows these ways of dealing with it, of making it really a live event, and it's not at all getting boring. I must say I was very. Also, when I got this engagement, I was also very excited. So I think he must have been more excited, because to trust me, that was quite a thing, I think.
Well, I was going to ask you.
I was also thinking, so I will be in X, I will be in London, and there will be other performances in Luxembourg. And so I spent 4, 5, 6 months with this piece, and I must say it's not at all getting boring. So I'm very happy with it.
Well, that's a relief. I mean, I do wonder, George has been explaining how he was conducting it in Aix and conducted the rehearsals. How daunting is it for you to now be the one in charge?
I don't know the word daunting.
Do you feel under any pressure?
Well, the 7 minutes before the opening night, as he said, are a bit tough. But no, I think it's what was interesting was really to do this process together. So to be an ex and to understand how. I was there when we worked with the singers, with the orchestra. So I got a deep insight view of the score, of the opera, of the drama, and also we talked a lot about this process of composing, also, which was very interesting for me, and I think it even changed I must say, it changed my view on on other scores. So I can more imagine now how composers who I can't talk to anymore, how they might have approached a composition or a piece or something. And so I think to be so much in this process makes it also real joy to do it. Actually, doing only X would have maybe felt incomplete for me. So I'm very happy now to also bring it on stage.
George, I think it's worth saying that this was it's something of a departure for you in the sense that it's a shorter opera with a smaller orchestra. You mentioned, I think, 22 players, didn't you, at the beginning? Why did you decide on a slightly more reduced canvas?
Well, this piece was premiered in the Aix-en-Provence Festival, which is an extraordinary venture which happens in July in Aix. And 11 years ago, Martin and I had the premiere of Written on Skin there. And when we were invited back by Pierre Audi, the director of the festival, to write a piece for the 75th anniversary of the festival, we all agreed very early on that we didn't want to go back to the same place where we had a premiere a decade before. And there's this gorgeous theatre, the Jeu de Paume, which fits 450, 480 people in, which is a very beautiful hall, very intimate, lovely sound, lovely feeling, magical place in a way. And it was very quick that we decided we should write something for there. And also the idea that the singers could actually be looking into the audience's eyes from only a few feet away. And that the piece could wrap around them. That appealed to me very much. And why 22 musicians? Because that was the absolute maximum we could fit in their small pit. And one of the challenges facing me while writing the piece is I didn't want the orchestral side, though it's often quite soft so the singers don't have to shout, that I wanted it to be extremely varied in colour and rich in tone. And therefore, to avoid it sounding frail or like chamber music, I put all my imagination into trying to fool the ear that there was a large orchestra in the pit and not a small ensemble.
That's interesting. So it provided you with a fresh challenge in some ways. That's so interesting. Yeah. And what about you, Karina? Because you are used to conducting big orchestral pieces and you know, big orchestras in the pit at big operas. This is much smaller for you, is it, as well?
Yeah, but as he said, so this is also very interesting as a conductor to discover this kind of writing and to serve the idea. And for example, when it gets very symphonic, sometimes it also gets, I would say, very large so from contrabass clarinet low to high piccolo. So actually the sound is doing this. And so I don't feel at all reduced in possibilities. So actually all possibilities with the orchestra are there. And to go very intimate and to go very, very large also. And I think what I maybe discovered rather as in X, when I was also assisting to the performances, is how much we have sometimes kind of orchestra outbursts. So we have the singer, the drama going on, and then suddenly on stage the emotion becomes maybe unbearable and not expressible. And then the orchestra is like exploding and it's really coming, all this emotion is coming from the pit and then giving space to the singers again. So this also happens, this kind of, dialogue or the orchestra really helping also the drama.
So interesting. George, the central character, the woman who travels through every scene on her quest, I know you've said that the work, and I'm quoting here, is like a series of bubbles that the woman walks through. Is it fair to say that each scene is almost like a completely new piece, and that there isn't actually a musical thematic thread that links them together?
There's not a... in the great majority of cases, there isn't a thematic thread. That wouldn't seem right to me. She's going on her quest. Magically, she finds herself in an entirely new place. And I wanted to capture that new place and the new challenges facing her and the new relationship with the people that she meets. So each scene is almost like starting a new piece, but there are things which thread through each of these bubbles and hopefully lead until the very end. Firstly, there's the character of the woman and the way that she sings and the way that she behaves and the way that her emotions fluctuate across, and the writing for her, across the whole piece. But there are subliminal things that you don't need to know about, really. But above all, on the harmonic front, buried underneath. This summer, I had a brief holiday in France, in the center of France, and I went to the biggest cave in France. It's a huge chasm, 350 foot deep, and then you can go down, walk down, or in a lift, and you can walk under the ground. It feels like the journey to the center of the earth. And then you get on a barge, and you travel for 1 kilometer on a subterraneous river that no one upstairs can have any idea about. And it was eerie and magical and frightening as well. That's a little bit like what I'm talking about. There's something underneath, which is the harmonic control, which no one can analyze or should analyze while listening. But if the piece seems to hang together and the accumulation of emotion seems authentic, it's because that's there. Plus, there are signals in the orchestra at the very beginning of each scene, at the very end of each scene, which each scene has in common, which ties them together.
I have to ask you the name of this cave. I think we all want to go there. So
I can't.
can you remember
I have terrible memory for words. It's in the Auvergne, and it's quite hard to get to, but it's very famous because it's the biggest cave in France.
Okay, we can look that up on the internet. I take your point that there are signals and that there are little joining bits, but I suppose I wonder, for you as a conductor, is it almost like you're conducting separate, I don't know, what would be the word, movements? Or how would you best describe it?
I think it's different sound spaces or worlds you get from one to another, and they are quite specific. Something that's is very special about each scene, I would say. Maybe also a kind of partner instrument, for example, for one scene, or it's somehow very clear when a scene changes, and as you said, also with some signal material. But still, you have also some, for example, later something from beginnings coming back, or tempos being equal, and so it's not. I don't think it's
blocks.
It's not blocks. It's still as he just said, it's still a journey.
Yeah.
It's not some. It's a different sound world, but which is in the same travel.
Can I say something?
Of course you can.
Well, maybe the biggest challenge facing a composer of operas, and these are pieces which take up a whole evening, even a short evening, is the balance between diversity and unity. You need diversity to reflect the change of emotion, feeling, drama, and tension, but you need unity so it makes one piece. And this piece is gone towards, I suppose, slightly more towards diversity than the unity that I've worked in other pieces, and the text forced me to do that.
I'm just so fascinated by what you're both telling me. George, you've touched on this a little earlier about how you work with singers. I wonder, when you're composing, do you have a particular singer's voice in your mind?
Absolutely, and it will be the person who sings the premiere, and that person is decided before I start writing normally. And they come to my home, we play lieder and opera extracts together, I accompany them, and I see what they're like as singers, but I also see what they're like as people. and I take lots of notes. I create a sort of instruction manual about their voices. I interrogate them. Sometimes it makes them a bit they find this uncomfortable. I find out what they like to do, what they're good at, what their unusual gifts. I also find out what they don't like doing, so I avoid that or exploit it at a certain point, if needed in the drama. I basically learn about the machine that I'm writing for, and that informs me tremendously and helps me while I'm writing. In the end, I do it for selfish reasons. But when the piece is finished and the vocal lines are all completed, maybe it means something to the singers, and perhaps it will fit them well when the opera's first heard. Doesn't mean that other people can't do it afterwards, very interestingly. But it helps, above all, it helps me.
Do you wish you could handpick the members of your orchestra?
I would nearly say we did. No, I mean, in this orchestra now, so we have 22 musicians, and everybody is playing an individual line, part, yes. So this is, of course, very special, because normally you would have 5 cellists playing the same voice. I mean, now we have 2 cellists, but playing completely different parts. And same for all the instruments. And then every single player has often different mutes and different instruments. So we have this contrabass clarinet, we have recorders, we have bass recorders. So we have all kinds of special things, special features, and even interestingly the mutes. Mute, that's the word? Yeah. The mutes sometimes really change the characteristics of the sound. So we have, for example, trumpet and trombone parts where you would maybe not think that it's a trumpet, or we have viola with mute, which sounds nearly like horn muted. So we can go from horn to viola and back. And so it gets very interesting 3D effects, let's say. And you can really link sounds like this. And yeah, so I would say I think the members also are now the members of the Royal Opera House Orchestra. And of course, many of them played in other of George's operas already. So they kind of chose themselves to be also in this project. And yeah, and then they have these hand-picked lines for them. Yeah, and I think that gives quite, really interesting individual lines that we blend then together.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, you have completely whetted my appetite. I don't know about you, but I am now desperate to hear some music. Karina, would you conduct for us?
Yes, of course.
Perfect.
Yes.
And then if you would welcome to the stage the pianist, Breton Brown. And George, I wonder if you could introduce what we're going to hear, because it's much better coming from you than me, I think.
So we've chosen 3 short extracts. One of the reasons I went into the choice was that I actually had to choose bits that sound okay on the piano. When I'm writing, I don't write a piano score and then orchestrate it. I write into the instruments, and some of the opera doesn't sound right on the piano. But these 3 brief extracts, I think, do give an idea of what the music's like. And Brett, who's playing, also was the person who accompanied the rehearsals from the very, very beginning in Aix. So he's been with the piece, poor guy, for over 4 or 5 months now. The 3 extracts are as follows. Well, the first one is in the 3rd scene, the 2nd encounter that the woman has. Initially, she meets a pair of lovers who seem blissfully happy with each other, but they're not. And their relationship breaks up in front of her. So they're not happy. She can't take a button from them to get her child back. She then meets, that scene is quite light and playful. Suddenly the mood changes, and she encounters this guy in a cage, in a glass cage, wearing an extraordinary suit covered in thousands of buttons. And it transpires, when asked if he's happy, he says he is. And then she learns as things go along that he's happy because he's drugged and he's psychotic and in a terrible state, dangerous even. And as the scene gradually moves forward, the drug begins to wear off and we see what lies beneath it. John Brancy will be singing this. There's one or two rather unusual things he has to sing, and I won't say in advance, but I learnt that he could do this when, in his visit to me, he was warming up downstairs, and I heard him doing something I'd never heard before. And I rushed down, and I said, "What was that?" And I asked him to come to the piano, and explored it with him, and I knew in that split second that I would use it. In fact, it will be the core of this scene. And he's now going to perform approximately the first half of the scene, which begins with the woman, Emma, who describes this new. She has a piece of paper which describes each of the encounters she's having, and she will describe this one, and then the scene ensues.
Serenely in a metal chair, bright April sun, skilled worker, artisan, retired, enjoys silence and to receive flowers. Sir, you are an artisan and an extremely happy man. Happy. Look at my gifted hands. And these flowers give me such pleasure in the stainless vase, that even when the petals fall, I'm calm and happy. Oh, I am an artisan and an extremely happy man. Looking at my suit, you're seeing all the buttons at the wrist and throat. I made them. I can enumerate every button I have ever made, of horn, glass, silver buttons, each one cast from a crucible of fire, and buttons cut, cut, cut from bone, cut, cut, cut. 3,000, see them on one sleeve alone. They so. 300,000 on a single sleeve alone. And may I take one knife to save my child? I'd kill for a knife. One button. Take them all. A child's life is rich and irreplaceable.
Super, George.
So the thing that I heard John doing was this yodeling across the octaves, going up into soprano range, then coming down again with no break, with no gap. I couldn't believe my ears. Thank you both very, very much. So the next extract is from the following scene. And when this came through the letterbox, it made me laugh, and it also raised my eyebrows, because the character that the woman now meets is a composer, and an obnoxious and highly successful and boastful composer, who tells the woman that she's played across the world and that people think her 5 symphonies are works of genius. And the woman gets excited and optimistic because she must be so happy, and so she asks her, "You must be so happy, you must be so happy." And when the composer stops speaking eventually and considers the question, abruptly says no, and explains the fact that, in fact, she's very insecure and she's far from certain whether anybody will listen to her music in the future. And then something unusual happens. This very egocentric composer, typical of all composers, by the way, it's pure fantasy, becomes interested in the woman, asks her why she's asking these questions, why she seems so sad. And the woman unburdens her and tells her. And then the composer sort of begins quite quickly to consider what this might mean. But when it gets, well, you'll see in a second. So this is another couple of minutes, and it starts with the composer listing all the capitals around the world where her music is regularly played. And this will be Beata and Emma, please.
Tokyo, Milano, Chicago, Bilbao, Rio de Janeiro, Rio, must de Janeiro, Rio must be so happy. Tokyo, Bilbao, Sao Paulo, you must be so happy. But happy, happy. No. Look at Maria. your enormous fees mean nothing. Your properties, your lakeside Austrian retreat are all shamelessly empty. This atmosphere of grief, eyes too wide open, and traces of tears. Tell me, my child has died. That's difficult. Say you are happy. That is difficult. Say you are happy. Difficult. It is difficult. But so is art.
In the next scene, the woman who has now had 3 encounters, all of them proved disappointing. In fury and desperation, she sings an aria by herself in which she castigates fate and everything that's happened to her. And Martin, in this passage, gave me, on paper, what looks like a conventional da capo aria, because the text repeats itself. There's a few lines, and then some lines in the middle, and then the original text comes back. The lines are, cold earth, dead stems of flowers, come to life again. Why not my son? And she sings that twice, fortissimo, and then she has a middle section when, in great fury, she spits out hatred for these terrible people that she's encountered, while she wanted miracles. And then she calms down and she repeats the initial lines. Now, I didn't want to repeat the music. While the first time that she says, cold earth, dead stems of flowers, come to life again, why not my son? The second time that she sings it, I decided to make it much more intimate and quiet. Indeed, as if in sadness she was singing to her child, as if in a lullaby. And so Emma is now going to sing not the opening section of this scene, which would require the full orchestra, but this much more subdued repeat, in which the music is entirely different and very gentle and very quiet.
Amazing, terrific. George, I've a special thank you to you for introducing us to the music and being such a generous interviewee as well. I've absolutely loved talking to you. Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
Also thanks to Karina and Breton. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, we've heard some of them singing already, but now to tell us more about their performances, let us welcome back Emma Nibolowska, Beata Mordel, Cameron Shabazi, who we haven't met yet, and John Brancy. Great to have you with us. I think it is just worth us quick refresher in our minds. If we just go down the line and you remind us who you are and exactly who you're playing.
Yeah, so I'm Emma Nikolowska and I play the woman.
Yeah.
I am Cameron Shabazi and I play two roles. The first one is lover number 2, so insert whatever name of your second lover, and the composer's assistant.
Yes, and I am Beata Mordel and I'm playing the lover 1 and composer.
And I'm John Brancy, and I play the artisan and the collector.
Ah, okay. We'll leave that hanging there. So you've had 3 performances. Tell us how it's gone, Emma.
It's been incredible. Every night is so different, and that, I think, is one of the gifts of working in live theater, is that you learn how to not get attached to how you did things before. And I think that with every performance, we're discovering new layers of every character and in the music. And there are intervals I hear or textures that hadn't popped out to me before or didn't have the same kind of symbolism in my imagination. So I feel every performance is a really big adventure because I'm always surprised at what I end up discovering about the role and the piece as I'm inside it.
That's fascinating. I mean, Cameron, I'm not suggesting anybody is going to come to every single performance, but if they were to, would they notice the kind of differences that you're noticing as a performer?
Well, I've been at every performance, and I've certainly noticed differences because, in fact, our role, what makes our role so exciting on stage and off stage is to imagine every night as the premiere. So every night is a huge responsibility to demonstrate or bring people into the world that we have been invited to by the composer. And so perhaps that night the sun is shining and therefore something is brighter. Maybe that night it's a little bit rainy outside and so something feels a bit damp. It means to say that every day is slightly different, but it is the first time that person in the chair is hearing it, and it is in some ways the first time that we are singing it.
Yeah.
So.
And I know the 3 of you were obviously in Aix, and Beata, I wonder how different is it for you performing there and then here at the Limbury Theatre?
Well, it's not the biggest difference. I think the audience is really warm and lovely. It's been also in X and also here.
Not quite as warm in the theater, though.
That's true. Thank you for reminding me that. Yeah, so Jeu de Paume, it's no air condition. As much as I love the Jeu de Paume, it's the backstage is a bit tricky sometimes. But I mean, maybe also the sound, it's a bit bigger here. So we had to adjust the staging a little bit. Jeu de Paume is very intimate, and we could play around with that. And here we have to play around with taking a bit more space, so to speak, on the stage. But I think it's going really well so far.
How has it changed for you, John?
I think that's pretty accurate. The width of the stage is actually is larger, but I think the main thing for me is the immediacy of the language. Now that we're singing for an English-speaking audience primarily, it changes it a little bit. You go a little bit deeper into the text and into the diction, and you feel it differently from the audience. Not to say that it was good or bad in any way, but it's just different in that way.
Interesting. Emma, as I say, these three have been together. They've been in France. You're the newbie. How challenging is it to join a company like this, which is obviously very tight-knit?
Well, the team on this production is absolutely incredible, and I feel so lucky to have worked with all of you. And I was covering an X, so I saw everyone in action and as they rehearsed, and it was and now to be performing with my colleagues, I feel so supported, and really it's a really loving environment with our whole team, the actors as well, and the directors. Everyone has been so understanding of what it means to do this for the first time for an audience, and for the full length of the production. And so I felt just really over the moon, you know. It's it means so much when you're working with a team that has such a loving attitude and are always there to have your back.
Brilliant.
Can I just comment?
Of course.
Because...
Don't say it's not true.
No. By the way, no. I just have to say Emma has done, she did an incredible job in X already, because our other incredible woman was indisposed for the, I don't know if it was the pre-general, and Emma jumped in and did it. And I mean...
with a couple days notice.
In
X.
So all of us were like, we're a team then, you know.
Just days leading up to the premiere, right?
And it's just shout out to Emma. She's
brilliant.
Cameron, tell me a little bit about the music. I mean, how demanding is the score vocally?
Well, the music is very efficient. So there's not, I wouldn't say that there's a note that is in the score that shouldn't be there, and there's not a note that's missing. And what's interesting, this is now the third piece of George's that I've had the pleasure of singing, or studying at least, or dating, really, because you spend a lot of time with it, then you put it aside and you spend some more time with it. I would say that it's very efficient, and that this is the first one that he wrote, I say, for my voice, or for the voices that are in there, and yet he heard something that maybe I didn't even hear in my own voice. So there's a challenge in there that I think, really? This is what you heard? Okay. And then as I study it, as I study the reason for every harmony and the reason for the repetition, you start to realize, oh, that is an ability that I had, and he hears something that maybe I didn't hear in my own self. Yeah. So I would say that the music is very efficient. It is extremely challenging. Whilst being very short, it's sort of like cooking on intense heat. You have to be focused, otherwise it can overcook really quickly. It is intense, because the flip side of the repertoire that I do are about 3.5-hour long Baroque operas that repeat themselves without end. And so that requires a...
Endless pleasure, endless love.
Yeah, that takes a different kind of endurance. It's not because this is an hour-long piece that it doesn't require about 24 hours of preparation, if you have it. So I would say extremely challenging, requires intense focus, and constantly surprising. Constantly surprising.
We ought to give you an opportunity because you are going to appear in one of these longer operas, aren't you? On the main stage at the Royal Opera House.
Every minute is worth seeing.
That's coming up later in the season. What will you be in?
Yes, so we will have a new production of Jephthah by Handel. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it today. I hear he's traveling. But this will take place in November, and it is an oratorio that is being staged and has some interesting parallels with the potential loss of a child, except, I don't want to spoil Jephthah, even though it was composed in 1752. So if you didn't know, it's not really a spoil, but the daughter does live.
Okay, plug
yes.
over. Good.
Sorry.
We'll look forward to that.
Yeah.
Beata, we saw you, really performing then, and I wondered how you balance the vocal precision with the dramatic interpretation.
That takes practice. It does. I think acting is a very big part of why I do what I do. Some comes from, singing or the opera or a symphonic orchestra or whatever. But I really do enjoy acting. I've always done since I started. And
because your background is as a jazz singer and in musicals, is that fair to say?
Well, yeah, you could say that. I started with that. Of course, I have my classical training since I was 20 or something, but last year, But I started off as a jazz singer. And of course, George had seen this. He's picked up that this was my ability, so to speak, outside of classical singing, and I must say I'm really enjoying it. It is a challenge, especially on the composer scene. We're walking in this walking band, and you have to sort of be quite direct with your face, what you're thinking, because you're staring out, and the audience can see what you're thinking. So if you have dead eyes, it's not interesting. You have to really. You think as the character the whole time whilst you're walking on this treadmill. And I find it just a really good challenge. I love challenges like this. Of course, it demands practice, but of course, if you have time for that, you can do it.
Yeah. Okay, John, we have to rewind now. Here you are, you're going to George's house. He's upstairs, you're downstairs, and you start warming up. I mean, did you even realise he was listening to you?
Well, there's also a piece of this story. So I was there the previous day, and we worked through Dichterliebe, Ravel's Don Quixote. I think it was the Lieder eines wandernden Gesellen by Mahler, and we ended up performing an entire recital for his friends and family who were with us that night. And I didn't get an opportunity that evening to really, show him this other part of my voice, which is my, counter tenor or the falsetto part of my voice, because we were so focused on exploring all of this amazing baritone repertoire. And so I suggested maybe I come back the next morning, and he was very limited on time. So when I came over and we started working, obviously I'm going to warm up. And that's when I started sort of teasing it. And he was upstairs, and he came rushing down, and he was like, "What are you doing there?" And it was this amazing kind of, I can go up here into this part of my voice. And that's when the interrogation began, which was really kind of, I'll never forget it. It was amazing.
But how incredible must it be to know that a part has been created with your voice in the composer's head?
Of course. I mean, It's the deepest joy in getting to do this, honestly. It's, you get to sing things that are obviously masterpieces throughout your life, but I think seldom do we get the opportunity to have a living genius craft something for you. So it's been a very deep pleasure.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
We don't have very much time, but I did just want to ask all of you briefly your favourite bit in the opera. Emma, put you all on the spot.
It changes every night, I think. I really enjoy the moment when the woman is so frustrated in this, just after the composer and her assistant leave, and the woman is incredibly frustrated and breaks down, as George described the beginning of her aria. And after this moment, when she just bursts out and almost screams, "I wanted miracles." And the silence before that, and then the excerpt you just heard, I find that a very special moment because of the vulnerability that is possible with the audience in that moment, and in some ways breaking that fourth wall and exposing this and saying, why does death exist? Why am I in so much pain? Help me. Some, not help me, but I am in so much pain. See it. And I find the extremity of that moment and the extremity in many parts of the piece really stimulating.
Yeah.
Finding ways to navigate it every evening, see how it changes. Is it more angular some nights? Is it more lyrical in some places? So that is an example of one of, I feel, the very most extreme moments.
A special moment for you. What about you, Cameron?
Well, I hate to sound repetitive here, but I think what makes this piece so beautiful and quite important, because in fact it is an hour long, but I think it requires an additional hour to digest and to discuss. So I would also say that the cradle, the lullaby portion that Emma mentioned is such a touching moment. There is this element of why me? No one really fully understands a grief until they experience it themselves, and the loss of a child is probably, I don't have any children. I could only imagine, and in fact, I can't even imagine that is the deepest, most cruel thing that could ever happen. And I think this musical excerpt demonstrates that in opera, we have these grand gestures, we have these great big emotions, and we have these moments where we have to show you what rage looks like, when this is sadness, and you have nothing. You're left with nothing. And particularly the way that Emma manages these very difficult passages, which no one wouldn't tell that they're so difficult because she does them so well. You see that we're filled in this sort of collective emptiness. And that is reason alone to attend.
Beata?
That's very well put.
Yeah.
I don't think I can up my game of that, but no, I think actually.
R35 scene.
Thank you. No, I think in X, I remember this moment when we had this run through, I think the first time, and then Zabel, the character who is not here, which you will see if you come to the piece, she has this moment where the what do you want from me? And then the woman says, well, I just want to bring my child back from the dead. And then she says, on some note. And for me, that's like, I started crying for that, because it's so from the heart. It's like you expire, you like, all the life is like, oh, this is the pain, okay. I know what you're talking about. So I think that was the top one moment for me. But of course, the lullaby, where you have this jazzy introduction, I absolutely adore it. Yes.
Final thought, John?
Very definitively for me, actually, is the beginning of the piece. I love how it opens into this very simple recit of sorts, where the woman kind of invites the audience into the world that is this fable. And in the staging, I get to be on stage for almost the entire opening sequence. And it's just one plucked note from the harp, that's all she gets. And I just think it's the most magical, simple thing to open a show with. It's like, it's ballsy. I love it.
That's a great note on which to end.
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough. Emma, Cameron, Beata and John, thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And that's it for tonight's Insight, I'm afraid. But if this has all whetted your appetite, you can book tickets to see Picture a Day Like This in the Limbury Theatre here at the Royal Opera House until 10th of October. It only remains for me to say a few thank yous. Thank you to all my guests. Thank you to everyone who has been here in the Claw studio. And thank you to everyone joining us online from around the world for this Insight supported by Rolex. I'm Rebecca Jones. From me, thank you. Until the next time, bye-bye.